all down to about 50 plus slides, all down into about 45 minutes. So if I go through a little fast, note that this slide presentation will be available online, and it'll actually be a more robust slide presentations because there's some slides I took out. So kind of with that preface, I'm going to kind of zing through the first 10 slides or so and get real more specific when I get to the case studies and to the actual techniques that you could bring back to your office and actually implement. So that's kind of the goal, because I'd like you guys to be able to walk away with something that you can use. So first of all, we'll do, I guess I kind of went over this, an overview of what usability testing is, user-centered design, how to sell usability, a little bit about the stakeholders. Then I'm going to go into the different methods. The one how-to that I'm going to leave you with is card sorting, which is a fairly inexpensive, the dirt cheap, dirt poor aspect. And then go into 2 case studies of what we did with the NASA Science website, and then finish up with some additional activities or methods that you could implement. First of all, a few definitions. Essentially, usability in this case, some of you may be familiar with the Section 508 ADA compliance of usability. This is a little different. This is more of how effective is your site from the user's perspective. Can they find the information, perform a task or a function, and basically do what you want them to be able to do on your website? The user experience is kind of more a holistic view. It's the entire experience. When they came from the first arrival at the home page to finding information and executing a particular function, purchase, so forth, it's that entire thing. So some parts might work well and some parts might not. The entire user experience is judged on the whole. And then user-centered design is this concept where you would actually bring the users in, get feedback from them, get input, get what their needs are, all the way through your design and development, from the beginning, middle to end. I kind of find this is kind of intuitive, but why we need to do usability, basically if you are able to design your site from the start for your users, you'll reduce errors, you'll increase satisfaction, and you'll gain customer loyalty. It's kind of a no-brainer to ask who is going to use your site what they want to see, how they put together and construct your content, what types of things would they intuitively go to click on to find something. Getting that kind of information from your audience is going to make a better site. Now, when we talk about how to sell it, you do need buy-in. You need basically a client, basically who is ever foot in the bill to say, okay, I will spend this amount of money, whether you're going to do something that's just going to take some time and man hours and it's still fairly cheap, like card sorting, or whether you're going to do a full-blown assessment or validation study, which requires a testing room with the one-way glass and so forth, because that can be upwards $10,000, $20,000, $30,000. To get buy-in, basically you need to talk about the benefits that each of the stakeholders are going to get, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And return on investment, that's a great one. Basically, if you fix something at the design stage, that's about 1/10 of the cost of fixing something in the development stage. And the same way, fixing something in the development stage is about 1/10 of the cost of fixing something when it's in the field. So kind of a rule of thumb that, and if anybody's been through a development cycle on a website, you'll know it's much easier to move these things around when they're just paper, or they're just wireframes, or they're just concepts, than when you're actually hard coding and putting this stuff together. So a note on some of the stakeholders. This is the entire team, from the client to the outside users of the site to the different people on the actual team, the designers, the programmers. Usability folks are also on our team in our case. But say the system engineers, they're going to get, basically, by doing usability testing in the beginning, you're going to get better requirements, better, more usage-centered views of the functionality. and I think we're getting a few of our 135 folks in here. We started just a hair earlier because we were told that it would be okay. And the full PowerPoint's going to be available online, so don't feel like you've missed a whole lot. Basically, it's going to help make sure that you have the correct requirements. The users are actually going to be involved in, they're essentially co-authors of your requirements by getting that information up front. And for information architects, for example, it gives the users a direct input into how that information architecture is going to be. So we learned a couple things that I'll go into more later about how, say, our audience was teens and how the type of vocabulary that they're used to was different from what we use at NASA, but if we're trying to gear a site toward them, we need to make that adjustment. So the user's view of your information, your content, and how they structure it really helps the information architecture from the start. And then from developers and programmers, the whole concept of bringing users in the beginning is you can build it right the first time, which is a much nicer experience from a developer standpoint. So a couple of the testing methods we're going to talk about is card sorting, and that's the one that you should be able to take home, be able to do. And we're going to talk about a case study of what we did at NASA with design comparison tests and assessment and validation tests, and then cover a few of the additional methods in the back. There's also lots and lots of links and resources at the end of the slides, and these will all be posted. So if you don't worry about scribbling so many notes. Okay, for card sorting, the essential goal is to increase findability. We want to make sure that when a user comes to the site, they're going to intuitively know where to go and find, like if they want to buy a book, they're going to go to this area. If they're looking for big science questions like for us, they're going to go here. How they construct this information is what the card sort's going to try to answer. So it's easy to do. It's kind of 3x5 cards kind of sorting, as it says. It also identifies some of the things that are difficult to categorize. Maybe your audience doesn't really know what to do with. Maybe this is something new. So it'll help you identify those more difficult content types. And anything that's with terminology that's difficult. And I'll give an example of that later. So this is most effective early on in the design cycle, whether you have a brand new site or even if you have an existing site and you're going to restructure or redesign it. It's nice to be able to use this kind of method with a variety of different audience types that you know are going to come to your site. So even though it's the same site, same type of content, but if you're going to have teens using this site, or you're going to have undergrads, or they're going to have researchers, you're going to have a variety of different aspects that they want to have represented, or they kind of feel that the site should be structured. If you find something is structured completely different, you may want to make different ways to get to that content. So we want to make sure that you have content to sort. I remember when I did a lot of my web development, getting the content seemed to be like the hardest part of the whole job. So you need to get some content, and sometimes that's helpful when you're working with the client, because you can't sort things into categories, you can't label things if you don't know what the things are. So once you have some content, you're ready to work with this. There's three basic types of card sorting. An open card sort is basically people are given a stack of cards with a variety of different, very specific types of content on them. Actually, do you have the card? I'll read a couple of the specific types. It could be a specific article. It could be a specific science question. So here we go. This is an interview with a scientist who studies ice and the Earth's polar regions. So it's type of content. So it could be a story. It could be maybe we have a whole section on interviews. And what's another one? Instructions to build a model of the Cassini spacecraft that is studying Saturn. So it's like a little paper model or something like that. So there may be hands-on activities or something. How are they going to sort this kind of information is what we're after here. So after they've sorted them into groups that make sense to them, you ask them to actually label each of these groups. And in some cases, you could actually have them prioritized to give you a little bit of a hint on what you should probably plan on putting on the home page or highlight it on your site. A closed card sort, basically you're giving them the categories or topics, and you're asking them to sort into those categories. Perhaps if you have an existing website structure that you can't really change that much and you need to stick with certain categories, or if you're like NASA and we kind of have a little bit of an internal structure that we have to stay with, and we want to figure out how people are going to be sorting the content.
This also might help you if your customer's like, no, you have to follow our internal structure, and you can say, well, when we did the usability study, nobody followed your internal structure, so maybe you want to rethink that. It's a really good way of breaking them out of that. We're fortunate at NASA, their categories are Earth, planetary, astrophysics, and what's the last one I'm blanking on?
Heliophysics.
Heliophysics.
We invented that word.
But those make sense, but I know a lot of organizations have ones that make no sense at all. So.
And the scenario-driven reverse card sort is essentially you give them the categories and you give them actually scenario of what kind of information they need to find and where would they go and where would they expect to find that type of information. So I'm going to walk you through the whole process, and hopefully I have enough time. Okay, the first thing you want to do is select your content, and you're not looking for a whole lot. I believe I think we get down to 100 pieces of content is a huge card sort. Most people can handle around 30 to 50 very comfortably. So if you think about the type of content, you want to be as descriptive as possible in a small amount of words so it'll all fit on a card. When you actually get set up the group, you want to get 7 to 10 participants. That's a nice sample size to work with. Or you can actually use groups, and groups can work together, and depending on the type of scenario you're working with. Make sure they're representative of your users, of your audience to your site. We actually, when we did the NASA Science, we brought in informal educators to researchers to internal NASA employees because we know they're our customer, our client, they're also the users of the site. And they should have about 20 to 30 minutes. And when you set up your cards, these small cards, we actually printed these out on business card, laser jet paper that you can break apart in little business cards. They worked well, particularly when you have a lot of cards. And we also put, let's see, because we were videotaping this, and they were really small, so we put giant jumbo letters on the top so that we could see it on the video screen. You know how they put letter P and J together on the grouping. And it also helps with when you go ahead and analyze the data. When you start your card sort, you want to give them some brief instructions on what they're going to be doing. You shuffle the cards and you ask them to sort them into groups that make sense to them. Again, we're trying to get how they construct your content, how they group it, how they categorize it. This is going to be the foundation of your architecture when you look at analyze the data. Once they've grouped them, you ask them to label the groups, and then they can even prioritize, like I mentioned before, to figure out what would you rather have on the home page and so forth. It's also good to give them some blank cards because they may think of some, particularly if you're picking people who are in your audience, but I would absolutely expect you to have more information about the moon, and we just didn't put it in that subset of 50 cards. It's fine. Of course we have information about the moon. Let them write one and let them put it in a category. Okay, once they're done sorting, you with the letter codes, you actually group them up and you put them into a spreadsheet. And there's a template for this. You don't even have to make it. Add boxes and arrows, and there's the exact web link that'll be in this final slide presentation. the Excel sheet's all set up for you, and you can put in all of the groupings of cards. And the types of things that you're going to be looking for is there some consensus between all of the users on how they group the cards, how they labeled the cards, and so forth. And sometimes there's no consensus, and then you want to know why. Is it the type of content you pick? Do they understand the content? Or really, you need to have more categories. Once you find some consensus, and hopefully you'll have a little bit of consensus, that will then become the foundation for your information architecture and how you're going to structure your site. Question?
When you're finding it difficult for people to agree on, say, a group label or something, how do you try to bring about that consensus?
Sometimes we rely on what we've used, because I've worked with mostly existing websites, and we can conduct it again with a little bit finer tuned cards for content that works better. More of what we get, it's more the semantics. Like in the kids, they wouldn't go to Universe to find a story about stars, because they went to the sun. They didn't think Universe included stars, or they didn't think that was a good way. So we
And
made
actually, one adult thing that came up without, when we were doing the adults, is the moon. Nobody could figure out where to put the moon, and they weren't putting it correctly. With our 4 categories, most people put it under Earth, because, the moon is a part of Earth. Actually, it's under planetary. It's a planetary body. So we learned to promote it better. We know it's going to be confusing. We know we have to put it under planetary, but we are going to put a link on the front page. We are going to promote it heavily so people know where to find the moon. So when you get ambiguous data like that, sometimes you think, okay, we might need to promote things, have a way to show things off better than before having people having to go to the search.
So perhaps having links from the Earth section to the moon, that type, you can fix it. But we would still put the moon in planetary, because all of the funding for lunar missions is out of planetary. So there's certain things we can't change. Okay. Pros and cons. The pros, and basically you get a lot of information back from how your users construct your specific content. They can use their own language by developing their own category titles, universe, stars, galaxies. They're fairly easy to conduct, and you can basically do this, go down the hall with a set of, how are we going to structure this weird content that we have, and you go down the hall and you just have a couple people in the office maybe fill them out. And there's lots of different variations that you can do, and you can fine tune it. But the data analysis can get a little tedious, because you're typing in all these little letters that correspond to the little cards, and if you have 100 cards and you did 7 people, you could see how this gets a little bit tedious and difficult to get consensus. I mean, there is some stuff that just you may not have a consensus on. You may have to structure it a little bit better. And you want to do this at the very beginning of either a new site or a new redesign. It's not very helpful after you put together your architecture and your content types and everything. Go, oh, well, this doesn't work, or people aren't going to find it this way. So, okay, now I'm going to go into our first case study. This is the design comparison study. It includes a card sort. It's a bit of a larger study, and I'll show you all the things that are in it. Basically, we're looking at side-by-side comparisons of either prototype designs that we came up with that we want to implement. Perhaps we're doing a competitive survey, and we want to look at a couple different existing websites and compare them to your existing website, perhaps. They're going to walk through a couple tasks. So you're going to kind of mock up the types of things you think they're going to be, you would like to have people do on your site. And this is, when we do this, we usually have a moderator sitting with a user who's doing the participant who's doing the study. and we're behind a one-way mirror, or this is being videotaped. And the moderator tries to give them questions about the task, maybe help them along if they get a little stuck, and we observe or videotape and go over that later. So this one can be a little bit more cost intensive. So you can get a lot of information from this this study, and you can use a variety of different types of activities. You'll see we've threw in a bunch of smaller things, like we put a card sort in there as well, and it's quite a fun study. So here's our case study. Science Mission Director at NASA is going to put together a new site for teens. We did a little bit of research, what appeals to teens, colors. We got some nice looking home pages together. So we want to figure out which one's going to do best, which one should we follow on and develop. And we also wanted to validate, we had an information architecture somewhat. It was very loose, but it was enough to put together these concepts. We did a card sort to validate to see if we were on the right track. So I'm going to kind of buzz through logistics, and so you can kind of go back over these slides. But essentially, we recruited people, we paid people, because if you get a reserved time at a usability testing facility with the video set up and everything, you don't want people not showing up. It actually makes sense to pay them. So in the long run, it makes your study more cost effective. Number of participants, about 21, and we used a UserWorks facility here in Maryland in Silver Spring. And we took a sampling from the audience, looking at teens, but we wanted to see an age range because they're very different from 12 to 18. Okay, so you can see this was the entire test. I don't know if we wrote down how long the entire thing was. I think it was an hour to hour and a half. Because we were working with kids, we didn't want to go too long, so it's probably closer to an hour. And we threw in a couple of different things. There's the design comparison in there. We had them run through some task scenarios. We did the card sort in the beginning. So I'm going to walk through some of the things we did. I don't have a slide for the card sort, but essentially we put information that we know we're going to put on the site, whether it's stories or interviews or paper models, activities, and so forth, and we had them sort them into categories. What was kind of difficult was like multimedia, because we had images and videos, and often they were actually putting them into image pile, video pile, and we wanted to try to make one group. But it was pretty successful, the type of architecture that we had come up with to what the kids came up with the exception of the labeling. They didn't put stars with universe for some reason, so we actually looked at textbooks for middle and high school, and they, instead of having the earth science and solar system or planetary science, they actually just say stars and galaxies. Then you get scientists that say, well, it doesn't include black holes and dark matter and all this other stuff that's in. But you kind of have to find a good balance, because if you put universe up there and nobody understands it, it's not going to be usable for them, and it'll be frustrating. So the first impressions activity. Really, this is just that first impression. When you first come to a website, and in that first 3 seconds, you already kind of formulated an opinion. Is this the kind of site that I would go to get information for a school project? Is this the kind of site I come to play games? Is this the kind of site, does it appeal to me? Do the colors appeal to me? Would I click through it? Or I'm going to go off the next Google search item that came up, because I don't think I'll find what I want here. So this was, it was kind of interesting to see people's first impressions. A lot of the older kids, right off the bat, saw that purple and green, bright, and they just like, oh my gosh, my little sister would probably go to that site immediately. And it was amazing how different, like you're talking to a 12-year-old, and he said, oh, my friend's 11-year-old sister would play with that site because she's a babe, a kid, but you're 12. it was kind of, they really want to have stuff designed for them. So then what we did was actually take them on a task. We built out enough of these samples so that you could actually click through and find a couple things. So we built out like one branch a couple levels down and had a little bit of functionality, like if there was rollovers and stuff on the home page, and we did it for all 3 designs. We randomized it, made of the 21 participants, we tested each design 3 times for the click-through, 7 times. 3 designs, 7 times, 21, right? So we gave them something. There's a story about stars. Can you find the story? And see where they would click, and we found that they weren't going to universe. But that was the task. It could be any kind of task specific to your website if you were going to be doing this. So if it's, you know, track a package, buy a book, find a record, you know, bookmark something, you know, you figure out what it is, your, you know, top 10 functionality type things, and you want to test these tasks now, early on, before you build it out. And you can even, after each one of these, you can even have them rank, how easy did you find this task? Were you able to, you know, find it pretty easily? Was it pretty intuitive? You know, that type of thing. Sometimes they needed help with the task, and I'll go into that later. This was probably the funnest part of the test, where they actually ranked the 3 designs. We had them out on a table, and we would say, how would you rank these for a site you would go to complete a school assignment? You know, well, this one I go to first, you know, this one would have more information. Then we'd ask more, you know, well, why is that? And we found some interesting, one, we know that bright, colorful one, that's where they would go to play a game. They wouldn't go to it for a school assignment. It was interesting, the one, let me see if I can go back up to there. We called it the letterbox, kind of has that HD kind of format. That had the least amount of information, like textual information on it. As you can see, this bright one, actually it's hard to see this presentation. It's hard to see that, okay. So anyway, there's actually the intro to some of these stories are actually printed in there. So there's a little bit of text. There's some actual content there. It was interesting. They would go to the letterbox for a school assignment because they thought that it was, I don't know, conservative or state, or would be something that they would refer their teacher to. Yeah, I went here. This is an authoritative source. But this purple one, not a chance. Both from NASA, go figure. So, so we did a variety of those kind of ranking, and here, this was our results. This was just the 15 and 16-year-olds, but they ranked them on color, fonts, basically what appealed to them. Would they go? Does it have a clear purpose? Does it represent NASA? So forth, and from that, we were able to draw some basic kind of conclusions, what worked and what didn't work. So this funky, bright, colored one, basically, it's exciting, and it's the best for games and the best for kids. But since we're going after teens and we're going after kids that are going to actually use this site for reports or what they might need for high school, it's not going to suit our purposes. But what we did learn is that this might work for our kids' site that we're going to be developing next year. So we've got a little bit of data we can then carry on. The design, two, again, best research for information, clear purpose, and great photographs. And that was one of the reasons we put this together. A lot of the people on the design team loved it because NASA's got great images, and that's all this site was about, great images. The whole design was built around that. But it was kind of boring. They really didn't look at it much. There wasn't one that they would I think one of the questions would you click through the site? What would be the first thing you click on? And they didn't really have any good answers. They weren't very interested in it. And this one seemed to work the best overall. Got, you know, good ratings for graphics, for color, for NASA's image, and but there were a lot of problems with it. It was a little clunky. That's kind of how I put it together. They didn't like the star background. The navigation was like, they didn't see the navigation at all that went around the Earth. And I think a lot of people thought if you rolled over that Earth, it would do something. You know, like the grid, or it would spin or something like that. That's what they wanted to have happen, and it didn't. It wouldn't happen. So the types of things we ended up going with this design, but we're going to improve it based on the types of information that we learned. We needed to basically improve the navigation, the better link images. It was very image based, and if you didn't have a good image in it, it was confusing, and it's hard to see them on here. So I apologize, but you'll see this when it goes up on the online. And the Yummy design, that one we call Yummy, the purple one, is good for kids. So this was our resulting design, where we improved the organization of it. We kind of shrunk that globe down a little bit more, and this large field up there, actually when you roll over solar system, helio, and stars and galaxies, it changes. That image changes so that you know kind of what area you're in. So now the next steps would be then to go on and build this site out and do more testing to see if we're getting it right. The assessment study is basically, this is what we did for our adult site, the NASA science site. We wanted to have very realistic tasks, very concrete types of tasks that we know our client needs to get done. We wanted to have very little interaction with the moderator. There was some clear tasks we'd give them and just let them go. And it's kind of a sink or swim to see how they would perform. This is really good when you have an existing site and you want to test it to see what's working and what's not working, so you know where to begin for your redesign. It's probably one of the most common types of tests. And again, this is done with one design as opposed to the comparative design. And again, we kind of can do, there's quantitative and qualitative type of information we can get out of this. So how successful were they in doing their, completing their tasks, the click pass, how often or how far did they have to click to get there, and then qualitative.
You have a question?
Is it important to have an actual design when you're doing this?
Yes, at this stage you do. That's why it's good for like an existing existing site that you're going to redesign. You have to have enough that you can click through. I don't know. We built it out significantly before.
Ours went actually down 3 levels from each. When we were doing the initial build, we had the different categories, and you could go at least 3 deep on each. Now we had this information that we could take from our old site. So if you have a design, perhaps, but you need the data, you need the structure, you need all this kind of in place before you start running off and doing this.
Okay. Okay. Part of this is to validate some of those design decisions like we did. Like if we went through and did the kids site, we had this new, we would build that out enough that we could then do an assessment study on it. Uncover usability issues and make sure that our targeted audience can actually perform these tasks. So this is a follow-on to a design comparison that we did for the adult site, and those were the 3 designs. And we picked one and developed it out. And I don't think the next slide's going to show that, but it's going to go into the logistics again. 3 people, basically the moderator, the note taker, and the equipment person, about 60, 75 minutes, 20 participants. Again, we need to pay them, and we used a full-blown usability study location. Had a breakdown of our audience. Here we had everything from just science-interested public, people who saw an article and just hit CNN and they want to know more about the new Mercury Messenger's pass of Mercury, and they want to go find more information, all the way up to NASA employees that need to use this site for their daily job sometimes. Okay, and our overview. Again, we have the task scenarios, which is really what we're trying to do, get them to perform the things that this website is designed to do. And we added on here a couple other types of methods. We later call them, talk about convergent methods. These are smaller tasks, smaller methods that you would add onto a larger task. So something called a perceived information architecture task. Post-interview, survey, exit questionnaire. These are all smaller ones. You would never like conduct a full, recruit all of your people or pay the money to go set up this state just to do a little survey or this perceived information architecture. All right, this was the home page that we used for the test. Plone reference. Is this in Plone at this point?
At this point, yes, we had built this out to Plone. This was a skin we ended up not using. We ended up using a different skin later on. But it's basically our site architecture that was underneath this. So at this point, we were in Plone.
And some of the task scenarios that we gave them to perform were find images and videos from the Hubble Space Telescope, or NASA plans to return to the moon. Where would you find information about what science NASA's studying about the moon? And where can you find research about how NASA's monitoring air quality here on Earth? So some very specific, if they came and they needed to get information about, I saw this thing on CNN, or you guys are going back to the moon, why, that kind of stuff, that science-interested public would actually dive into this. It's not a general public kind of audience. Somebody actually has a little bit of interest in science to come here first. And of these task scenarios, we had had 9 of them. The orange colored ones are the dark or more reddish looking color ones. There are people actually completed the task 100% without help from the moderator. The yellow tasks they were able to complete, but they needed a little bit of help from the moderator to do this. And you can see it's very interesting because right down the board we have about 50% of our science-interested public, probably the furthest away from the science that we have in this study. About 50% of them could actually complete the tasks, and that moved all the way up to 58, 60, 62% of our NASA employees. We weren't quite there yet. We had enough. Now that looks better. We had enough built out of the site that they could click through it to perform these tasks to have some idea of the architecture of the site, how it's kind of put together, how's the content structured. And we actually asked them to, based on their experience just clicking through the site performing these tasks, what was the architecture. And what we found was the 3 or the 4 main buckets we talked about with our kind of the way NASA's organized: Earth, solar system, astrophysics, and helio. Those seemed to work. They understood that. They knew where to go to get information. And that really came out in this perceived architecture. The navigation across the top, some of them just drew the page from what they remembered and said, okay, well, navigation was up here, and these are the types of navigation. And other people actually drew, a architecture of the site. So we were kind of worried that people weren't picking up on the navigation, or they weren't kind of getting how the content was organized, and this helped us know, yeah, we're on the right track. We're on the right track. That's what data looks like for the for our usability expert. And basically, we did an exit survey and asked them some basic questions. Was the website attractive to me? Did it meet my expectation of NASA? Did it have the right balance of images and text? You know, this kind of like touchy-feely, qualitative. And again, we had some results. What worked, what didn't work. What worked was those 4 division columns, those buckets, as we were kind of referring to them. Focus areas, we have these like little links within each one that kind of highlighted some of the focus areas, like Mars. We do a lot with Mars, or the Moon, or with what is it, some of the applied sciences, or global warming, or something like that. Oh, did I say global warming? I'm not supposed to say that. Climate change, right? So that worked out well. The information architecture was also received well. That was working. This homepage grid layout, they seemed to respond well with that, and the search feature. What wasn't working, we tried to do this tab and feature at the bottom down here, where you could click on a tab and this entire information would change, which I know was kind of a flown nightmare.
Yes, we went through all the angst of, we should have tested that first individually, we decided later, because we went through all the angst of creating it, and then found out that every person that came in says, God, I really hate those tabs.
And a lot of them
we
didn't.
had developers sitting in the mirror room, and all of us are going, we knew it. So.
And that's an important point too. You want to get, if you ever do any of these, whether it's the card sorting or however, if there's a way you can set it up so that people on your team can watch, you may get one of the developers or programmers or even the designer to say, "Oh, I understand the problem there. Here's 3 ideas come to mind and how we could change it and make that work." So, and it gets more buy-in. They go, "Wow, this usability stuff. It's not just coming back in this report blasting everything that I did and it's not working," and it helps them along too.
You had a question?
One's a comment, one's a question. Like a comment too, I think project sponsors are really good at pulling in and watching.
Yes.
Yeah.
We had our customer in most of them. We had at least a customer.
To come, to each one that we did, we had some 1 or 2 of the studies participants they would actually watch, and it was very helpful because the client we had loved purple. She thought purple was like the cat's meow and everything has to be purple. And when she saw we tried to tell her that it's not resonating well. People that's some of the first things they say, I don't like that purple. And you could write that down, but if they actually sit there and see someone saying it, it helps.
And some of them are very frank. So make sure your designers have
tough skin.
Very tough skin, because I've actually had them, one time this is, wow, that looks like such crap. I can't believe NASA would put something out like that. And the designer, fortunately, our designer was, very mature about it. But they're very raw when they're alone in a room.
Yeah.
So, and what was the question? Sorry.
Have you ever tried doing like paper prototyping as opposed to actually design, just to see how people interact?
Websites look different and feel different on paper than on a screen. So people interact with them differently. You can do it that is a good option if you cannot afford to build it out first. I do that better than nothing. But beware that people will react to paper differently than something that's up on a screen that they can put a mouse over. And the mouse is almost like an eye, because people tend to mouse where they're looking. So, if you can't afford eye tracking, which we took out of this because we're running out of time, but you can see where they're looking, whereas if they're looking at paper, you can't really tell what they're observing or what they're lingering over.
So basically these tabs, they weren't clicking on them, they weren't finding the navigation. They missed news completely, which is up in the corner, and we kept wondering, they're asked to find a news story, and there's science news, and they would never click on it to find the news story. So the secondary navigation was a little confusing. So we came up with a list of recommendations, yada, 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 and then and here are some of the things that we did. That primary navigation bar that we originally had this like flash, moving pictures, cool thing. It was huge. It was taking up a lot of real estate. So we kind of
Shrunk it.
Yeah, shrunk it, but there was another word. But anyway, economized it kind of and highlighted that secondary navigation that was just not coming through in the first design. and got rid of the tabs, and then we had to coax our customer down to 3 boxes from 8 tabs. And this was the resulting wireframe, so we took another stab at how that homepage was going to present the information. And then this was the final design, and it got modified and modified after that too. So what you see today at nasascience.nasa.gov is even different from this.
Yeah.
But
you can kind of still see the wireframe when you go there. It looks completely different, but you can see we still have the buckets. We still have the 3 sub-buckets. We still have a primary nav. News is still in the same place. Still the skinny, flashy thing. And we added another navigation.
and things you can't foresee, you can try to, design this for your user, but what we had was a new director come in. So our boss's boss changed, and he was very hands-on, and that's why it looks very different. We almost went through a whole nother redesign after we presented. Okay, and real briefly, convergent techniques are basically smaller, quicker methods you can throw into a bigger study, like 5-second tests. That first impressions, what do you think? That's a 5-second test, a real quick kind of a test. You can go down the hall and ask somebody, same kind, here's 3 designs. Which one do you think best represents NASA? That type of a thing. Ratings of confidence, like after they go through the tasks, have them rate it from 1 to 10. Did you feel you were able to complete that? You're up. I give you 2 minutes. No minutes.
Oh, no. Basically, something you can do is also online surveys and feedback forms. We actually have a feedback form on our site. It's Contact Us. If you click there, you can actually, we will get that. We'll get a ticket. One of the things, you can get a lot of responses from things like this, or doing online surveys and trying to collect information that way. You get a lot of responses. You don't have to send anything out. You can also do many surveys at once. But the cons, there is a limited depth. You don't get to look at people, and you don't get to verify that the person is who they say they are. You don't know that they are actually female in the science community and 44. People tend to up their education. People who haven't taken one college class will claim a BS. People who have, gotten their BS and thought about a master's say they have their PhD. This happens a lot. And you can also, it's just, you don't get to see who the person is, and you don't get to ask follow-up questions like, hey, you said that was really interesting. Can we talk a little bit more about that? So be careful when you do stuff like this. It's a really good way to get information, but it can be skewed. And as always, only certain people fill out these forms. So you're missing a whole demographic. Let's see. Also, if you have a website that you're taking over and you happen to have, they have web metrics or log files on the server, see if you can get a hold of those, because those can tell you a lot. How are people getting to, what are people viewing? What's popular? How are they getting there? Are they getting there through search? Is your navigation good, or can they never get to it through your navigation? Are they getting erroneous results? They search for the moon, and they end up on something totally weird. You don't know why that search got them there. You can look at that and try to figure out what's going wrong. But with web metrics, go talk to your favorite sysadmin. There's Cacti, AW Snaps, Google Analytics. You can look at, through those you can look at load, hot linking, and how are people using their images, patterns of viewing. Are you kicking us out, Matt?
Say wrap it up.
Okay. Okay. And these are just some references and tools that you can look up later when we upload the slides.
That's it.
And that's it. Do we have any questions?
In your test, how many people use the search box?
Every one of them tried at one point that I can remember. They all went, oh, I want to use it. And we said, no, don't use search. We had to instruct them not to use search. People tend to get a real quick 3-second, I can't see it now, I don't want to think about it, try to search.
We have one person that would actually do the find feature, if we're looking for a particular term or moon or something, he'll get to a page and he'll do find in page, moon.
Yeah. You had a question? we'll provide them somehow.
And the slide that we're going to put online, it's actually going to be more than what you saw today. So I just had to pull some of the stuff out too.
Any quick ideas about, doing this with much smaller organizations and projects?
There's one that we did.
Like the card sorting
yeah.
at the start.
You can do remote testing, where you can actually monitor a computer from a distance. You can get kind of screen capture software, but you can even just write some tasks down and give it to somebody and have them go through and do the tasks. And you can even have them rated, 1 to 10. How well did they do? And you can just make sure you pick people that are representative of your audience.
See about pairing up with the university, with the psychology department, because a lot of them, we have a lot of master's students who will do anything to get their master's thesis out, and will run a study. So a lot of times they have to run studies, so if you can provide them with a little bit of money, they often have the place to do it. They have the computer, they have the time, and they have the need for it. And so get a real good relationship with somebody in human factors, information architecture.
And there's lots of links in the references here to go to, like boxesandarrows.com and so forth, that give you some ideas of things you can do. And then we can provide like the Excel sheet for analyzing card sort.
So, since most people in the Plum community use Mac, there's a really good tool called Silverwood Mac, which it uses, you need a Mac on each end, but essentially it records the person doing the task and the task being done on the computer, and it puts those together, and it like organizes it, and so you can do like 16 interviews and you get an output of that. So it's kind of like a remote user testing thing. So if you can recruit people on the other end with a Mac, they can run that thing and get a video of them reacting to the design as they're doing the design and recording what they're saying.
Cool.
Pretty cool.
And a big part of the science behind this, when people, get their degrees and study in usability, it's that crafting the questions and the tasks. So that, sometimes you can hit it perfectly as a novice, but oftentimes you just kind of take that with a grain of salt when you're looking at